Years have passed, yet this memory clings to me like a shadow that refuses to fade. I do not believe in ghosts, nor do I entertain foolish tales of spirits lurking in the night. Yet what happened that evening still haunts the corners of my mind. Logic tells me there must be an explanation, but reason does little to silence the whisper of doubt that lingers. My stepfather worked out of town, gone for weeks at a time, leaving the house feeling emptier, more vulnerable. During his absences, we had a tradition, one my mother insisted on maintaining, of taking turns having sleepovers in her bedroom. An absurd ritual, if you ask me. The room unsettled everyone, held an unshakable wrongness to it. If there was any place in that wretched house that could harbor something unnatural, it was that room. I never cared for the whispers of my siblings, their superstitious nonsense about shadows moving where none should exist, objects shifting without a sound. But the bedroom, it did something to people. Lights flickered, strange noises crept through the walls, scratching, tapping, things best ignored. And worst of all, the heavy, suffocating feeling of being watched. That night, it was my turn. I did not ask for it, nor did I try to avoid it. Fear was a weakness, and I would not allow such trivialities to dictate my actions. My mother had stepped outside for one of her usual cigarettes, leaving me alone in that wretched room. Before she left, she asked if I wanted the light to stay on. I scoffed at the question but told her yes, if only to humor her. Minutes passed in uneasy silence, the faint hum of the house settling, the distant rustle of trees outside. Then, the light flickered. Once, twice, then nothing. Darkness swallowed the room whole. And then I felt it. The mattress dipped beside me, the unmistakable weight of a body settling into the bed. I did not turn to look. I did not need to. I assumed it was my mother, returned from her smoke. The presence beside me radiated an unnatural chill, the air around me dropping in temperature. But that was to be expected, was it not? She had been outside. It was the cold night air clinging to her skin. I muttered something dismissive, some idle greeting, but she did not respond. Instead, she reached out, her fingers trailing down my spine. Cold, so very cold. Her hand moved in slow circles, the touch initially soothing, but then, pain. What had been a simple touch became something sharper, nails digging into my skin, scratching, pressing harder, harder, until discomfort turned into unmistakable pain. My breath hitched. This was not a gentle caress. This was deliberate, intentional. I whispered for her to stop. No answer. The scratching intensified, deep and cruel, tearing into my flesh like claws. My body tensed, the urge to recoil overwhelming, but I refused to move. To react was to acknowledge the growing dread swelling within me. I demanded she stop again, voice firmer this time. A moment of hesitation. And then, just as suddenly, the touch returned to something softer, lighter, almost as if it had never happened. But the damage was done. The room felt different, heavier. Something unspoken lingered in the silence, an oppressive weight pressing down on my chest. Then the door creaked open. "I thought you wanted the light on?" My mother's voice. From the doorway. I did not move, could not move. My body was frozen, muscles locked in place. The weight beside me remained unmoving. Still. I muttered, my voice hoarse. "But, you came back already." A beat of silence. Then her voice, laced with confusion. "I just came inside." The words struck me like a physical blow. My stomach twisted, while rising in my throat. I forced myself to roll over, to see her standing there, the glow of her phone casting shadows across her face. I turned back to the bed. Empty. There was nothing there. No one. I swallowed hard, forcing the trembling in my fingers to still. "You're sure? You just got inside?" She nodded, stepping closer. "I finished my cigarette a minute ago." I felt the itch before I saw it, the dull burn across my back. "Can you check something for me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. "Shine the light on my back. Feels itchy." Her phone's glow illuminated my skin, and she made a noise, a mix between a laugh and a sound of unease. "You're all scratched up," she murmured. "Like, bad. How'd you even reach back there?" She thought I had done it to myself. I did not correct her. Instead, I turned away, pulling the blanket over my shoulders. There was no point in explaining what could not be explained. But I knew the truth. I was not alone in that bed. And whatever had been there with me was not my mother. Sleep did not come easily after that. Even when exhaustion clawed at my limbs, forcing my body into restless submission, my mind refused to quiet. Every creak of the house sent my pulse hammering against my ribs. Every gust of wind against the window became a whisper in my ear. Something had been there with me. Something had touched me, scratched me, and then vanished as though it had never existed. But the marks on my back told the truth. My mother's concern was fleeting, quickly dismissed as some strange, self-inflicted accident, but I knew better. I could still feel the phantom chill lingering on my skin long after the warmth of the blankets should have driven it away. The next morning, I did not speak of it. Not to my mother, not to my siblings, not to anyone. What good would it do? They would only laugh, shake their heads, tell me it was nothing. But it was not nothing. I avoided my mother's bedroom after that, finding excuses to sleep elsewhere when my turn came again. If she noticed, she said nothing. And I made sure to never be alone in that room for long. Then, one night, weeks later, I heard it again. A scratching sound. It started faint, almost imperceptible, just beneath the hum of the television. My siblings and I sat in the living room, distracted by the glow of the screen, but my ears picked up on it instantly. A slow, deliberate scraping, like nails dragging along a wooden surface. It was coming from the hallway that led to my mother's room. I tensed, the sound sparking an instinctive unease in my chest. No one else seemed to notice. The television's volume masked the subtle disturbance, but I heard it, felt it. The same eerie weight I had experienced that night in the bed settled over me, heavy and suffocating. Then, as if sensing my attention, the sound stopped. A chill slithered down my spine. I turned my head slightly, just enough to glance toward the darkened hallway. The door to my mother's bedroom was slightly ajar, just enough to see inside, just enough to see that it was empty. Yet, the silence stretched, unnatural, waiting. A single whisper of breath, a sound so faint I almost convinced myself I had imagined it, drifted from the darkness. And then the door slammed shut. I shot up from my seat, heart hammering against my ribs. My siblings jumped, startled by my sudden movement, but I did not care. I stared at the closed door, my breathing shallow. "Why'd you jump like that?" one of them asked, laughing. I did not answer. I couldn't. Instead, I forced myself to sit back down, to pretend I had simply been startled by nothing at all. Because that was what they would tell me. Nothing at all. But I knew better. I tried to ignore it. I told myself that maybe it was all in my head, that I had let one strange experience turn into a paranoia I couldn't shake. But the house had other plans. That night, long after everyone had gone to bed, I lay awake, listening. The house had its usual sounds, the wind rattling against the windows, the occasional groan of wood settling. But then there was something else. A faint tapping, rhythmic, deliberate. I turned onto my side, staring at my bedroom door. The sound was coming from the hallway again. A slow, methodical tap, tap, tap. My fingers clenched the edge of my blanket. It wasn't the pipes. It wasn't the wind. It was something else. Something waiting, listening, watching. Then it stopped. The silence stretched, but it was not comforting. It was thick, pressing down on me, forcing the air from my lungs. I tried to breathe, to convince myself that nothing was wrong. But then, a creak. The floorboards outside my door shifted as though someone had stepped onto them, careful, hesitant. I stopped breathing. Another step, closer this time. I wanted to call out, to ask if it was my mother or one of my siblings, but the words stuck in my throat. My heart pounded so loudly I thought whoever, or whatever, was in the hallway would hear it. And then, just as quickly as it had come, it was gone. The house fell silent again, as though nothing had happened. I stayed awake until morning. When daylight finally bled through the curtains, I dragged myself from my bed, exhaustion weighing on my body. I found my mother in the kitchen, sipping her usual morning coffee. "You couldn't sleep," she asked, eyeing the dark circles beneath my eyes. I hesitated before shaking my head. Just had a weird night, she sighed, setting her mug down. You know, your stepfather used to say the same thing. He never liked this house. I frowned. What do you mean? He used to wake up in the middle of the night, swearing he heard someone walking in the halls. Said it felt like someone was always watching him. She shrugged as if the thought didn't bother her, as if it were just an odd memory. Maybe that's why he never stayed here long. A chill crawled down my spine. I wanted to ask her more, but something told me she wouldn't have the answers I needed. Because whatever was in this house, whatever had touched me that night, wasn't something she could explain. And I had a feeling it wasn't finished with me yet. That night, I resolved to stay awake. If whatever haunted this house wanted me, I would be ready. No more cowering under the covers. No more pretending I was imagining things. I needed to know. I kept the lamp on, the soft yellow glow barely cutting through the suffocating darkness beyond my bedroom door. Midnight came and went, the silence stretching so thin it almost felt unnatural. Then, at exactly 3:07 a.m., it started. Tap, tap, tap. The rhythmic knocking echoed from the hallway, deliberate, like a taunt. My fingers curled into the bedsheets, but I didn't move. I listened. The tapping stopped. Silence swallowed the house again, heavier than before. And then, the door handle to my room rattled. A slow, deliberate twist, testing the lock. I sucked in a breath. Then came the whisper. Low, almost unintelligible. But I heard it. Let me in. My pulse thundered in my ears. My body screamed for me to move, to hide, to scream. But I was frozen, paralyzed. The whisper came again, more insistent. A shadow flickered under the door, shifting, waiting. The handle twisted harder this time. The lock held, and then it stopped. The presence lingered for a moment longer before the pressure in the room lifted, the suffocating dread easing, dissipating like mist at dawn. I remained still for what felt like hours, too afraid to move, to breathe. When the first hints of morning light crept through my curtains, I finally forced myself to move. My limbs ached, stiff from fear. The door was still locked, but as I stood, I noticed something that sent a fresh wave of unease coursing through me. Long, jagged scratches marred the wood of my door. Claw marks etched deep into the surface, as though something had tried to tear its way inside. That was the last night I stayed in that house. I don't know what haunted that room, what had touched me in the dark, whispered in the night, tried to force its way in. And honestly, I don't want to know. Some things are better left unknown. I moved away soon after. My mother still lives there, oblivious to the thing lurking in the shadows. But I know better. I can still feel its cold touch on my skin, hear the whisper just beneath my breath when I try to sleep. It wasn't finished with me. Not yet.